So in this small video, let us try to understand this term immutable objects. Immutable objects, people use now and then in their Shisha programs, but probably you are not formally informed about it. So via this video, I would like to inform about this concept. Immutable objects are those objects which once loaded cannot be modified by any way. Again, I repeat, immutable objects are those objects in which once the data has been loaded, it cannot be modified by any way internally or externally. I will explain this concept internally and externally in the further part of the video. In what kind of scenarios will immutable objects be used? Immutable objects will be used wherever the data is static. For example, you are loading a master data. Now master data, once it is loaded into memory, you don't want to change it. For example, you are loading currency master, you are loading country master. So country master data hardly changes, right? So what normally developers do, they go and take this data and they cache it. And such kind of a data, we don't expect it to get modified later. That's where exactly immutable objects are used. So, it can be master data, which is not changing. It can be configuration data, which probably you are reading from a web config file or an app config file. It can be singleton objects, which are used for sharing. So wherever the data is static, in those kind of scenarios, developers use immutable objects. Now, in order to create immutable objects, the class should have the necessary features to support the same. For example, now you can see that below we have a very simple currency class, and in this class we will be loading currency data from the database. If you see the nature of currency data, it is a master data. It is a master data which normally does not change, or I will say it is static. Now, in order to make a class immutable, it is a three-step process. The first one, as we said, when we say that the object is immutable, means nobody can change its data, right? So the first thing what I would like to do is I would like to go and comment these set out. So all the setters of the class, I'm going to go and comment out saying that nobody can change the data externally of this class once it is loaded. So we only have the get. So this is step one. Step one, we have commented out the setters, right? But now by removing the setters, the next question which comes to our mind is that how do we provide data to this class? Because we need some provision, right, by which we can go and load data inside this class, right? So what we'll do is we will go and create a constructor, and via this constructor, during the object initialization, we will go and pass the data. So in this constructor, I will say we are going to go and pass the currency name, so cur name, and we will also pass the country name, right? So country name. Okay, so when this object gets initialized, so during the initialization itself, we will pass the data through the constructor, and after that nobody can go and make changes to this data because we have removed the setters, right? So now this is step 2. So over here we have created a constructor, right, to pass data. So constructor to pass data. So now if you want to go and use this immutable object, it is something like this. So I can say here currency cur is equal to new currency, and while I create the object, at that time itself I will say that okay, the currency name is INR and it belongs to India, right? So now you must be thinking that this currency object is now completely immutable. Now let me again reiterate the definition of immutable objects. If you remember, I said immutable objects are those objects which once loaded cannot be changed internally or externally. Okay, at this moment, once I load the currency object externally means, if I am a client who is consuming this currency object, I do not have the rights to go and set anything here because I have removed the setter. So basically externally, no one can go and modify this currency object, right? But internally, if there would have been some logic. Okay, let us say if this class has some logic, right? Some logic can go and modify the country name variable, right? So if you see internally at this moment, the class is still allowed to go and modify himself, or the object himself can modify the data. Now again, this should not be allowed, because when we say immutable, immutable means you should not be able to change it by any ways. If you are allowing that, then that object is not immutable, right? So how do we go and stop that these variables to be modified by the class himself? So for that, we need to write, or we need to do one more step, that is make the variables read only. So by making the variables read only, this is the final nail on the coffin to make your class immutable, right? So I'm going to go and make this read only, and I'm going to go and make this read only. If you look at the read only keyword, what it does is it allows the variables to be loaded only once in the constructor. That's it. After that, no one can go and change this variable by any way. So over here, if you see now, even the sum logic cannot modify the read only variable once the object has been loaded, right? So if you see over here, once the data has been loaded, after that, neither I can modify from my external client. You can see the red error over here saying that there are no setters, right? Second, also internally now I cannot go and modify the data by any way, right? So over here in the constructor only I have the provision, or I have the authority to modify data. So now this makes our class completely immutable, right? So three-step process. First, go ahead and remove the setters. Some of the people, they are comfortable of making the setters private. That I will leave it to you guys. Okay. Second, go and create a constructor by which you can go and load data into the object. And finally, make it read only, so that this variables cannot be modified from any way. So that makes your object foolproof immutable. So before we end this session, let's quickly revise, what we have learned about immutable objects. First thing, immutable objects once loaded cannot be changed internally or externally. The uses of immutable objects are as follows. First one, whenever you want to load master data, like when you're doing caching, where once the data has been loaded, you don't want it to be modified. Second, when you're loading configuration data. Third, when you're using singleton design pattern, where you have a globally shared static data across your project. Again, immutable objects becomes very useful. And to make a object immutable, the class should have the following things. First thing, get rid of the setters or make it private. Second one, have a constructor by which you can go and provide the data. And last one, make your variables read only. So thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed this session of immutable objects. Thank you.